Good day, and welcome to today's webinar. HP and Vivid Worldwide Experts deliver amazing applications with confidence and performance now. Next slide. Today's webinar is brought to you by HP Software. Our host today is Todd DeCapua, and he will also be moderating today's webinar. Todd is a local user group and a special interest group leader here at Vivid. And Todd works as the Senior Software Executive at HP Software. Next slide. Our speakers today are first, Scott Moore. He's the CEO and President of Northway Solutions Group. Scott has over 20 years of IT experience with various platforms and technologies. And Scott has tested some of the largest applications and infrastructures in the world. He has mentored and developed testing services for big 5 services firms, top insurance companies, and major financial institutions in the U.S. We're super excited to have Scott here today. Our next speaker today is Petar Pekarish. He is a consultant for Nationwide Insurance. Petar has over 18 years of experience in the quality assurance and performance engineering field. Petar has pioneered several new methodologies and products for multiple companies in the performance engineering profession. Currently, he is a senior level engineer for a large insurance enterprise. Excuse me. Last but not least, we have our presenter and moderator, Todd DeCapua. Todd is the Senior Software Executive for HP Software, as I mentioned earlier. And Todd is one of the tech industry's most respected thought leaders on application performance engineering and a renowned speaker, author, and visionary. Next slide, please. We have just a few small housekeeping items to go over. Today's live session is intended for all Vivid members. The recording will be posted in the webinar section on the Vivid website, visible for all Vivid members. Additionally, today's slide deck and webinar recording will be made available to you. We will send you the link via email once both are posted to the Vivid website. If you have any questions as we go along, please be sure to type them and send them in using the questions pane in the webinar control panel, which is shown on the next slide. Here's a picture of the GoToWebinar control panel that usually appears in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. To submit a question, make sure the questions pane is expanded and type in your question and click on Send. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started, and I'll pass it over to Todd.
Great, thank you, Stephanie. And man, what a bunch of old guys you guys have the opportunity to listen to today. But I know that Scott, Petar, and I are thrilled to be able to be here. And the objective really for today is to enable you guys to interact with us and have this collaborative conversation really focused on performance and looking at both having these HP and also Vivid Worldwide experts on as a panel, helping you to be able to deliver amazing apps with confidence now. So as we get started with this, on the next slide, we talk a little bit about the vision for how this is going to roll out. So as we go through this conversation, what you're going to hear about is the past, the present, and the future. So Scott, Petar, and I will share a little bit of our opinions on what we've seen in the past, what we see coming up both right now in the present and then also in the future. We will have 3 polling questions throughout this session, all of which these answers we will also put on a blog and will be included in a follow-up email, which will provide you with a link to the recording as well as the blog and a PDF of this presentation. So to get started, I wanted to get right into our first poll. With that polling question, what you will see come up on your screen right now is this quick poll, and we're really looking to understand what percentage of your development and testing effort is being spent on performance. So, and again, as Scott and Petar and I together, we've seen this kind of go up and down. But just from the participants on the call right now, wanted to get your perspective and your vote for where this is. And again, you can see the ranges go anywhere from 0 all the way up to 100% of your effort being spent on performance, or just saying, you know what, there's none, we don't use performance. So as we wait for these to come in, I know Stephanie, once these wrap, we'll go ahead and see where we are, and we will share the results and have a brief conversation. All right, so I am able to see these results, and it looks like the majority, or 52% of the people who responded, said 0 to 25%. So again, I think from my experience, that seems pretty reasonable. It's also interesting to note, though, that 30% of the people who responded said 25 to 50%. So again, my expectation was probably somewhere there in the middle is what we would see for the majority. So with 0 to 25% having a 52% response, and 25 to 50% having a 30% response, basically 82% saying 50% or below. Again, that percentage of your development and testing effort being spent on performance. I guess, Scott, from what you've seen at Northway Solutions, and also your other 20 years of experience coming up to today, what is it, when you see those responses, what do you think? I mean, is that pretty realistic for what you're seeing in the market today?
I think so. I think that's pretty realistic, and I'm actually happy to see those numbers, because that, in recent past, it hasn't been that way. And I think just where we are at within IT today just kind of forces companies to think more and more about it and spend a bit more effort on it. So that shows some improvement from what we've seen in the past.
Yeah, and from my point of view too, over the several years, I've been blessed to be at one organization the entire time, and can have seen this trend rise and fall several times. And right now, I think we're actually on an uptick again, where we're not only spending, I guess, more of the financial dollars in actually support of performance in the tooling and in the methodologies and actually doing the practice of it, but also in the time that's allotted to it. So now we're getting that combination of, the time and money going together to actually getting some real results. So we're not having as many issues in production later.
That's great points all around. So again, as we keep moving through the content here that we have prepared to help guide this conversation, we're going to jump right into the past. And from a flow, what you guys are going to see is, I'm going to present an idea first, then Scott will present his idea, then Petar present his idea. But these are all three of our own opinions and things that we've seen going on in the past. So if we jump right into, what is it that I've seen in the past, and some of the maybe trends getting us to where we are today, one of the things that I like to highlight is the simple fact that all trends are kind of bending to the user. So again, this focus on users needing to have constant access, wanting to have the latest features within the applications or in apps running on their device of choice. So as you can see, as we move left to right here, looking at mobility over the last several years and the trend there, again, people are moving more towards mobile apps and having them on whatever device whenever they need it at their fingertips. The velocity, so this rate of release per application per month, has needed to go up, again, because the users want to have these latest feature functions in their hands whenever they need them. But again, it's become very, very competitive in the marketplace. And third is this idea of constant access, also being able to deploy and design applications now to be able to design for the cloud. This could be varied from a back-end infrastructure on the different hybrid environments that exist. But again, this upswing is one of the other trends. So the three trends, I guess, that I would highlight and looking into the past is this increase or huge uptick that we've seen in mobility, in velocity, and also in cloud as a result. Scott, I don't know if you have any comments on that or if you wanted to share some of the past performance challenges that you've observed.
Yeah, I can just share with you what we've seen at Northway Solutions Group for the past 10, plus years. There's and where we see it kind of heading in a different direction. I think anybody who's been doing performance testing in IT for any period of time, 5 years or more, have seen that there's the traditional, waterfall development life cycle where you have this traditional, internal applications that you're testing. You have a performance testing lab. So, for example, your load runner components of a controller and some generators, and you're supporting the applications that you have in house. But there's this disconnect, and always has been, between development handing it over to this performance testing team, which is usually part of QA. And many times you have the development delays, you have functional defects, the scope gets decreased or compressed and causes you to not be able to test as thoroughly as maybe you'd like, or for whatever reason. And sometimes this causes performance defects to show up in production regardless of whether you've tried to do performance testing or not. And then management begins to question, well, we have a tool, we're performance testing, why are we still experiencing these problems? What's the value in this? Is it the tool? Is it the, what is it? And we see that many times QA as a whole just assigns somebody the role, sometimes a functional tester, of being a performance engineer. And they're trying to fill that role, but they're not understanding that performance engineering is really, and performance testing is, a niche skill set, always has been, and I think always will be. So they may not have the right methodology in place to use that tool, and therefore there may be performance defects that go undetected until it's too late, and that's unfortunate. But trends, when we're talking about trends, we do see that beginning to change. We find that companies are now trying to get a good understanding of what are the technical aspects of performance testing that we need to train our people on, and be able to look at analysis reports and be able to not just test the app, but explain what do these graphs and charts mean. So we see companies really focusing on, how do I get the right resources in-house that have those skill sets that can do this, and not just assign it as another assignment for some, any QA resource that might be out there. So we see that as a great change, having the right resource in place to handle that.
That's a great point, Scott. And I think, being able to find these resources that have not only a good understanding of those technical aspects of performance testing, but also the ability to explain these findings to the business in a meaningful way, continues to be a challenge that I guess I've observed as well. Is that something you're seeing also?
Yes, and that's something I'll be talking about in other slides too.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, agreed. Same issue that we have here as well.
I guess, Petar, are there, maybe there's a couple points you wanted to throw in here for the trends that you've seen in the past as well?
I pretty much have seen what Scott was seeing over the years as well, and I'd say, as far as the past goes, it's one of the bigger trends that when I was earlier starting out, was the fact that QA and performance was just not very well thought of, even pre-Y2K time periods. So it took a lot of work, politically within the organizations to actually, go back and actually prove your work, and then start showing those miracles that the group can pull off. And that was something that was a huge challenge for our group, say, pre-1998-ish. But, yeah, that's slowly getting much better. As the successes build up, the credibility skyrockets. So that was one of the big ones in the past that I wanted to touch on. That's about it, I think, what I want to add.
All right, cool. Well, the visual that you have in front of us right now, is one that's interesting, and quite frankly, I think it's unique to one of the ways that I know that you like to work, and it's really thinking about, some of the back-end stats that, again, as Scott had alluded to, application performance engineering is a very unique and differentiated skill set. It's it's one thing to say, yes, we have a testing tool, yes, we're running a performance test. However, when it becomes application performance engineering, it's a lot different conversation. This that you have in front of us right now is what helps to set that apart and really getting into that next level down. So I think, maybe the trend or what you've seen in the past is moving from that mid to late 90s to current, where teams are now understanding, and maybe it's just because of this, complexity of composite applications have grown. It's not just a two-tier application anymore, and, everything else that's going on with things like cloud deployment, et cetera, has caused all this other, I guess, stress on a system, or that dependency piece to become more complex. So I don't know if you want to spend just a minute talking about, what you've got in front of us, but I think this is a huge piece that needed to be talked about.
Well, yes. My primary, I guess, passion around this whole space has long been around the tooling and visibility of systems. And I'll touch on it in another slide further up that, sometimes that particular fact doesn't make me too popular with certain groups because of this historical siloing effect across organizations. And it took a long time to actually break some of these down. And early on, and even into the recent, say, even the 2000, 2003 time frame, it was still there, where you had, once you start getting past, say, your load runner reports or performance center reports, you're looking at transaction response times off the end. We still had to have a way of seeing into the systems to know what was actually going on behind the scenes. And so you have the OS stuff coming out of RStatD for Unix, and perfmon out of Windows, SAR and VMstat, depending if you're using different Unixes, AIX, and the mainframe technologies. But the issue there was still, in most cases in companies, that information came from separate teams, and you had to actually build all those relationships with those teams to actually get the data, because as performance testers or QA analysts, well, we were that other group that we were requesting services of the others all the time, instead of working really side by side to actually prevent some of these issues going to production. The same went with the database technologies, whether it was the early MS SQL or the DB2s, Oracles of the day. And even Sybase way back in the when too, there was some stuff. We had separate groups for them as well. And what was more unique about in the database tiering for us was that not only was it separate groups for the database, each technology of the database had its own separate group as well. And then you had to figure out, well, which engineers were available that could actually help find the issues. Once you said, hey, we have an issue with this query, let's figure out how to deep dive that and add indexes or do different database archiving techniques and different things like that to speed stuff up. But you had to find that right individual on those specific teams that actually knew what you were talking about in order to actually implement some change. And then the problem actually for us, I'd say, was even worse at that infrastructure phase, where we're looking at the VMware farm statistics. We're looking deep level into network switches to figure out why are packets dropping, even though everyone says everything's running okay. And the same goes for our middleware, whether that's our source-oriented architecture pieces, data power, the app platforms themselves for Java, whether it's WebSphere or looking the older Tuxedos kind of stuff, .NET, platform hosting. So when you get into those, you're starting to piece together I guess a lot of the settings and implementations that are completely out of your control. So it's definitely an entire organization, not just a small group anymore. And that kind of leads to lots of meetings and trying to figure out, okay, now we're going to run, say, a mixed test for performance. Who do we invite to this ball game? And it ends up being at least 40 people, and that definitely was a challenge early on. And with that, do you have anything to add to that one, Scott?
No, I totally agree, and I think the one thing that you mentioned there at the bottom with VMware that's just interesting is that now not only do we have to worry about the individual machines that we're using, but we have to worry, are they virtual, and we have to bring it up one level and find out, are they on the shared, on a shared VMware server, or and how is that being affected versus the individual machines?
Exactly. We spent several hours troubleshooting some of those things, and especially when you get into back then when it was the hypervisors were all new. Then you have to figure out, oh, what algorithm are they using to actually balance the time slices so one application doesn't get swamped.
And it's funny, Petar, as you were just talking through all of these specific technologies and the challenges. I mean, I'm sure, like Scott, I mean, I just found myself cringing and almost having flashbacks, remembering all these days with all those technologies and even some of the biggest production issues that we saw going in. And, we as performance engineers or QA testers would get called in, often to jump in on a tier 2 or 3 kind of level support in production. So I guess if we move right into the next section, this is our second polling question of 3. And, we've heard a lot of kind of here's what's gotten us to where we are from the past, some trends that we've been seeing. But this question is really around, when done right, what is the impact of performance to your business? And as you can see, you can select, oops, I wanted to be able to select multiple here, but please select which one you think is most relevant. You can see we've got things like increased revenue, increased customer acquisition, increased market share, increased brand value, and also increased shareholder value. And again, the idea is performance being defined as a high-performing and resilient system for your customers, and what is the impact really to your business as a result of that. The other thing I'd mentioned is I will be writing up a blog which will have the answers to these questions as well as a couple of the highlights and the links to all the relevant information that you're looking for. And many times, people who participate in these calls like to be able to leverage that blog and those results to then be able to share that with other people. And that's really my ultimate goal here, is to be able to bring a lot of the experts in the industry, talk through what is a very relevant topic for you today, and also be able to understand maybe what the perspective and the results of your peers are on some of these questions. So I can see the results. It looks like number 1 is increased brand value with a total of 45% of the people responding with that, and then following quickly behind is increased customer acquisition, so being able to grow your customer base, and then also increased revenue at both 27 and 23% respectively. So I think looking at these, Petar and Scott, it looks like increased brand value is number 1 at 45%, and then number 2 and 3 are pretty much tied at increasing your customer acquisition and increasing revenue. What comments would you guys have on those results?
Sorry, Scott. What I was going to say was I think that the way that you can show the value of a brand and when it's done wrong is just watch an episode of Shark Tank. And every one of those people that are presenting before the sharks are trying to increase their brand. They're trying to build a brand with these sharks, hopefully. All you have to do is just go to their website while they're presenting. And I can't tell you the number of times I've seen that 503 server busy. How does that really affect their brand? Immediately. So I said that doesn't surprise me that that's the number 1 thing people are looking for. When it's done right, it will impact your business in a positive way.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And it's kind of it's interesting to me that brand value took the top tiering of it, just because that aligns with the fact that brand value is that number 1 long-term kind of rider for your company, organization, or whatnot. That if you mess up the brand, it's not just a now kind of thing; it's a lingering effect, which then brings down everything else in the list as well. Okay.
Yeah, both great points. So as we transition into the next section, we're going to talk about present. So what are the things that myself, that Scott and Petar are seeing currently out in the world of performance and performance engineering? So what I'm going to get into is an area that I'm often pulled into, both within HP as well as many of our customers and prospects. So this is a topic around continuous testing. Many people will get this a little bit confused with things like continuous integration, continuous development. They can go hand in hand, but I guess what I'm talking about is just this idea that, you know, we are continuously running tests, continuously getting results. So kind of the piece that Petar had talked about of, you know, hey, we're getting ready to do this huge, you know, integration test, and we're going to have all these different systems involved. Well, I think it's evolved from the past to the present to the point where now we are continuously testing our systems, and we need to have as accurate of a existing infrastructure and results as possible. We need to make it realistic. It needs to be reliable. It needs to be repeatable. All of those factors factor into what presently people are doing with continuous testing. I've also called this performance application lifecycle, and you can see below in this illustration, you know, the idea that, you know, we're collecting and analyzing production data. We pull that in. We use that to then analyze and tune the load test data or load test scenario. We then execute our load tests and then look at those results, being able to compare that to production and the load test data that we had received, ultimately that being a feedback loop that comes back into being able to analyze and tune that load test scenario. A very simple example here is, you know, as you're doing this continuous testing, you know, maybe you know that you're going to have an upcoming promotion or an upcoming sale. Another webinar that I recently did with John Jeremiah was around, you know, how do you get ready for, you know, the holiday season and the inevitable retail volume that we see in the United States as a result of that. That's another perfect example of how you're able to take that production data, build that into your scenario, execute it, and then compare those results and get that feedback loop into it. But again, this all being continuous testing, and this being the area that I see many organizations challenged and focused on regarding performance. So Scott, I know at Northway Solutions Group you guys are getting into a lot, and you're currently seeing a lot of these happenings in performance. What are a couple ideas you'd want to share?
And some of the things that we've seen that are just hot right now, and one of mine is exactly what you just said about continuous testing. I'll start with Agile first, though. You know, we see this big movement to move over from traditional waterfall to Agile methodology, and there's some good and some bad to that. I mean, Agile methodology tries to put project resources in the same room or close proximity so that the various roles can communicate better. Smaller releases mean that there should be a faster testing cycle with smaller changes. So if you've modularized your automation scripts, it should be even easier in some respects. Still a good idea to see a maintenance or testing sprint at major milestones, and you still have to do integrated performance testing with the app as a whole at some point to fully ensure performance across the board. But the biggest challenge we see with Agile is a lot of groups transitioning over to Agile, doing it properly, and in some cases having to work around some things to do it right. What I mean by that is in Agile you see where roles are expected to be somewhat interchangeable. You know, this sprint you're going to be this role, and the next sprint you're going to be the next role. When it comes to performance testing, though, we've mentioned that it's a niche skill set. So developers, and don't hit me for this, but developers aren't always the best testers, especially regarding performance. So it would make sense to keep a performance engineer in that same role across all the sprints. So whether that, that may have to be the best practice that they use within Agile that may not necessarily conform, to all the Agile methodology. Mobile is another big force to be reckoned with, and it's caused companies to have to consider the network impact. And this is something, Todd, I know you're very familiar with. The network virtualization used to be StormRunner, now has been acquired by HP. That is becoming more and more prevalent in the conversations that we have. In the past, we've always told when we first found out about network virtualization, they said this is something you need to have in your testing lab. But the companies would say, well, if we're testing our internal apps and we're in Atlanta, we've got somebody in St. Louis, we'll just put another generator in St. Louis and go across the actual network, and it's a one-time thing. We won't have to do it again, and we'll see how much different, what the difference is between the two. But now with mobile, you're not. It's forcing companies to think we can't try to put something somewhere else, and we need it in our lab to be able to create it in a pristine environment to mimic a 3G and 4G and LTE and everything else that could possibly be there, good connections as well as bad. So that gives the load testing lab a lot more capabilities as well. Same thing for the cloud. How is, what connection do we have with our apps up in the cloud, and how can we emulate that network connectivity inside of a lab internally? I think that's very powerful. So that's a great thing that we're seeing. And just finally, you piggyback on what you said. When the term DevOps became really hot, you started hearing about continuous integration and continuous deployment, but QA is kind of feeling left out here because they're saying, okay, well, you got Dev and you got Ops. Where's the QA? Shouldn't it be Dev QA Ops? Because when you have continuous development, you should have continuous testing in place. So that's why it's important to to note that you can begin to integrate HP's Load Runner Performance Center tools into things like Jenkins, and that's more important than ever. So DevOps needs to understand that continuous testing should always be part of continuous integration and continuous deployment.
Those are all great points, Scott, and you've probably seen it in some of my messaging recently. I've actually called it moving from DevOps to DevTestOps, because
right.
I think you're right. In the CI/CD, the continuous testing, all the above, that's what we're seeing happening in the marketplace. So, let's call it what it is and help people to do exactly that for all the right reasons. The other part, you mentioned network virtualization. I think, there's the mobile piece being the end user part. There's also the back-end infrastructure piece. I know that you had highlighted cloud, but, it could be any of the infrastructure deployment scenarios, being able to recreate those infrastructure components and the networks that they're dependent on, also in your development environments, your test environments, and I'm sure your ops teams even have environments that they try to recreate production incidents in. Again, that's another place. And I'm not going to make a huge pitch here, but I'll also mention the idea of service virtualization being another area that supports everything that we're talking about.
Great point.
Yeah, and I'd like to add in there too that the whole service virtualization, I guess, coming to the life finally is actually taking on here as well, where it's actually been very helpful in actually proving out certain production issues, where we were able to actually isolate certain services that were going awry and basically replacing those stubs out with, here's a known condition we know is going to force something. That way we could just basically recreate that whole event within about 2 hours versus trying to dig the data out of production and maybe half hit it in PT. So that's one of the really nice things about service virtualization as well, that it's very handy and it is here and now.
Yeah, and even bringing those two bits together, so having the service virtualization part, recreating those services or recreating other things like a mainframe, right? We all know that having a mainframe available in development is pretty unlikely, but you could leverage HP service virtualization to recreate that in all of your environments and have it always available, as well as recreating the network part with network virtualization within service virtualization. So anyway, again, I didn't want to have this become too HP-centric, but I think in the topics that we're talking about for the present, it's very relevant.
Yeah, and it'll show up on the tooling side here very, very quickly here as well. Yeah, so for my piece, for what we currently have going on in present time, is that shift from going from a siloed view of the world into a really nice place to be right now, which is that a full unified view and aggregation of all the data coming in from all these back-end systems. well, actually look back end all the way to the front end. And with those toolings today, we have basically the HP Performance Center and LoadRunner, the Diagnostics for J2E and .NET, and the integrations that it brings along. If you have HP RUM, the real user monitoring, a very key piece in what we were talking about before, to where you take your real-time production data and grab that, and then you can push that back into LoadRunner and Performance Center to actually build your scenarios correctly. So when you're looking for a 1x test, you can actually achieve a 1x test. Then you have the HP BSM for Business Service Management, which is kind of like the overarching application that handles, in many cases, it can be PT and prod. Some groups have chosen to have dashboards created within that, so we can actually see what's going on in the different environments. And then that's also fed by Sitescope data, which is the traditional monitoring piece, which for us has greatly simplified monitoring and PT testing, as well as production, where we can have standard templates by technology that just get deployed. The data all comes back in. You don't have to contact anyone. The data is just there. One of the things that we're currently using a lot of right now is the topology views within Performance Center, which is kind of like taking the Sitescope methodology and putting it on steroids, to where now you can define once your system under test topologies, deploy that into your test, and then you just have to do it once. You don't have to set up everything every time. The data comes back consistently and with the same templates all the time. And then the other neat feature is that while you're running the test on certain events, you can actually start to see where certain pieces of your system under test start bogging down, and you'll get a little warning about that, which is handy. We use Confio Ignite, and there's other technologies you can also use. But for us, that's our database probes and also our VMware visibility in a lot of cases. That data is very handy, because then while you're running your performance tests or your or any of your tests you're looking at in production or otherwise, you can say, oh, hey, this is where that query came in, and oh, yeah, it does match what Diagnostics shows, as that JDBC call just took 2 minutes. Now we can find out why it took 2 minutes, and your engineers can do it directly. You don't have to wait for analysis later. Same thing goes for MQ monitoring. There are various things within Diagnostics you can add in, and there are some other integration points that can be done where you can push whatever data you kind of want in to the Diagnostics infrastructure as an external monitor. So then you can actually start building your performance area, kind of like mini dashboards for trending. So then while you're doing the testing, you have all that data available all in one place, and you can start looking at those live trends every 5 minutes or 20 minutes to see what's going awry as it happens. And that is one of the methodologies that we're currently using more and more often with our performance testing, is that we're doing less and less of post-analysis and a lot more of live analysis while the tests are actually happening. And then that way we can involve the other groups on demand and hopefully get a lot of these things ironed out while the test is even running. Then finally, the APIs across a lot of the vendor products support all these integrations. You just have to find someone to support that for you and let you have access. And then from before, yeah, you might not be popular with the traditional silo crowds, but your users will thank you in the end, because your time to resolution for issues, and also the fact that you're finding, I'd say mostly in our case, probably 75 to 80% of these major issues that we would normally miss in PT tests early on, we're now seeing and can actually prevent and do it during the time of testing versus waiting another 2-week cycle for that to happen.
All great points, Petar, and I guess just knowing the environment that you're working in and to where you've built this over time, this is performance engineering, and this is what you've kind of explained, what you can build to and how it works together. For our next poll, you can see, and this is our last one, so I appreciate everybody's participation so far. If you could have a look here, when done poorly, what is the impact of performance to your business? And here you will be able to select all that apply. As you can see, some of the same responses, so loss of revenue, loss of customers, loss of market share, loss of brand value, and also loss of shareholder value. Again, if you could just take a few moments and go ahead and select all that apply you believe as it would relate to the impact of performance to your business. We would appreciate it, and then we will share those results not only here right now, but also in the soon-to-come blog as well. I can see a lot of responses coming in. I guess while we're waiting for these to come in, where we're going to go next is into the future. So what is it that Scott, Petar, and I are looking at our crystal ball and saying, hey, these are things that we're seeing coming up in the future as it would relate to performance. And some of the things maybe specifically we're seeing today that would help point you in a direction, as well as this influx of knowledge that is happening and all around us today in the marketplace. So interestingly enough, the response is coming back here. It looks like a lot of people really focusing in on things like loss of brand value still, but all four of the top ones, so loss of revenue, loss of customers, loss of market share, and loss of brand value are all fairly high at greater than 50% response rates. Lower is the loss of shareholder value at 22%. So Scott, I don't know, do you have any reflections on these results that we're seeing of when done poorly, what is the impact of performance to your business?
Yeah, I think most people get it now that when something's not performing well, even if it's a nice application from a functional standpoint or the way it looks is great, no matter how sexy it may seem, if it doesn't perform well, it's going to be perceived as a poor application. So it goes back to the idea that a great idea delivered poorly is a poor idea, and I think most people get that from the answers that we're seeing here.
And I would concur with what Scott said. That's perfect.
I mean, the other thing that for me has been pretty interesting, and this is probably over the last, I don't know, 6 years or so, is being able to go out onto the App Store or out onto Google Play and look at the ratings that have come back and the comments that have come back. And I think, as we think about brand value specifically, that's maybe one way of measuring it from an objective perspective. Some of the other pieces, the loss of customers. I mean, I personally have had a poor mobile app experience, and that's caused me to change one of my major service providers as a result. And I don't think I'm unique there. So maybe that's why brand value coming back at 83%, and then next, loss of customers coming back at 72%. I think for all of us, we're seeing pretty similar, subjective feelings with objective results that can support that.
Yep.
So as we look into the future, so for me, I love this the image that I was able to find for the future slide, because I know as Petar and Scott and I are doing our jobs, many a times we feel like this in our offices, and we've got all these pieces that we're looking at and reporting on. But as I look into the future, there's a few key maybe thermostats that I have to help me gauge things. One that I wanted to point everybody to is this World Quality Report, which is published by Capgemini, Sogeti, and HP. The 6th edition was recently released. I will put a link to that in the blog as well to make it easy for you to find it. And really this conversation around lifecycle virtualization is one that the World Quality Report calls out. So as we go to the next slide, you can see I've just got a few call-outs here helping to understand what is lifecycle virtualization, what are these major areas that it covers. As we build in, you can see network virtualization, that both Scott and Petar briefly talked about. And then lastly is a quote from a CIO in a UK government agency talking about how virtualization virtualization has helped them to reduce the challenges. Again, some of the challenges we've already mentioned today, but again, this is when I look into kind of what is the future. This is what was captured with the World Quality Report study. So some of the specifics on the next slide I'm able to capture, just 4 quick highlights that were in the World Quality Report. So you can see 32% of the people that responded said network and service virtualization was a top priority for them. 62% of them already using virtualization to emulate these network conditions for load and performance testing. 59% relying on virtualization technologies to validate application functionality, and 54% having virtual environments key to being able to predict application security and vulnerability. So, you know, we're talking about and focusing on performance for this conversation, but, you know, even within the functional teams, within the security teams, you know, the broader testing and validation of these systems, virtualization or lifecycle virtualization is a pretty significant play. Again, this was what I'm seeing in the future, backed up by objective results from the World Quality Report. So I guess with that, Scott, looking to turn it over to you to see where we are going with your perspective.
Well, this is just my play on the future. I mean, I think in terms of services around, you know, performance testing services for organizations, and I think the future is really a hybrid of what we've known as the center of excellence concept. I think Petar is actually involved in one at his company internally. I think that the key is going to be can service-oriented firms come up with a virtualized center of excellence, not just the virtualization that you've mentioned, but a service that can be on demand. It requires resources that understand performance across the entire software development lifecycle, which starts in development. It includes standard testing and tuning, as we've always known it, capacity planning, and performance monitoring, working hand in hand with operations as well. The key for large organizations is going to be having a dedicated team, whether that's internally or a virtual team that is familiar not only with the applications, but also the culture of the business as well, and how to interact and communicate with them well. So that's been pretty elusive, and I'm not saying that that's an easy thing to do, but I think as technology and the service models continue to shift into the future, this is going to be something that's going to be needed, and organizations are going to have to be able to provide that. So it's more than just a remote consultant, if you will. It's more than that. It's a member of their team, just a virtual member of the team, if you will. So that's where I kind of see it going. I hope that's where it's going. But again, I don't think it's easy, but I think that service organizations need to step up to the plate to deliver that.
Yeah, I like the way you phrased that too, with the virtual center of excellence, because, you know, looking back in the past from my career as well, the whole performance group has been something of an enigma to management in general, to where they don't know exactly where to put us. Do we work at the enterprise level? Do we work at the application area level? Do we do both? And having it, at least having that center of excellence concept and making it virtual, I think allows for that flexibility to finally come through, to where you can at least staff and find those rare engineers that can see across the entire infrastructure sets and application groups and know the internals of things, but yet they're not tied to just one, say, business area. They can be used across the enterprise, and then can be micro, I guess, aligned to those applications that need them when they need them. But you still have that centralized group where the knowledge is actually centralized as well. Yeah, that'd be something I think great for the future.
And I know, Petar, you've got some ideas as you look at your future crystal ball that you wanted to share as well.
Yeah, and basically what I kind of view as what's coming next is just moving everything to the next level. Now that we have this single view of data and team members can actually get to most of the data they need all at once by themselves versus relying on other things. Now we're kind of moving in an age of where, well, it's machine data, it's the automated learning, and having the tools available that enable that. And a lot of that stuff is either just recently released or being developed right now and probably due out within the next probably 2 to 3 years. And then, as on the slide, some of the supporting characters around that is, HP's Vertica product, the Ops Analytics piece, Service Health Analyzer. And then I'm doing a lot of work with the open source modeling around machine data and how do we do predictive services to look at those trends and provide what's next and what's an anomaly around that. Again, there's more diagnostics integrations and integrations among the tool sets, I believe, is coming. Again, we're looking more into having that real-time performance data coming out of production using HP RUM to guarantee that you're looking at 1x concurrent user models when you need them, or you can actually pull out the problem load coming out of production to test and PT. One of the areas I'm also looking at right now is around this prescriptive scenarios. And so yes, application topology and the infrastructure topology-based tests are being suggested automatically by your code base or your application infrastructure for you. I'm currently looking at ideas of how to pull that off. We've had, we had several, production and PT events that would definitely have been caught if this was something available, i.e. around looking at concurrent, simultaneous connections to different back-end systems. And you're just knowing that, based off of certain, application infrastructures, you have pooling events for different things. You have a certain number of events planned coming into a system. They can only get to 1 or 2 back-end pieces at the same time. Well, that stuff's already known. Why can't we use that and develop those tests automatically to actually force those conditions to find out what exactly happens then, not just under 1x load? Because a lot of times you won't see it until you see the spike, but the spikes that you see in your systems are basically going to be covered up by the averages coming out of your other monitoring tools. So you may never know you had a problem, but your users will tell you later, and then that's usually too late. Then finally, I think the benefit of all this data coming in as now knowledge that you can use, that's already been predetermined, and you can use it, is that this, I guess, a new phrase I'm kind of working on, the business DevOps, finally being realized, which is where your business goals for your applications and your systems, along with the development cycles and your operations actually in run, are all finally working at this, basically on the same goal at the same time, and then supporting each other, instead of having all those disconnects across the years. That's where I see we're going. It's a lot more around machine data and automation. Back to you, Todd.
Excellent. Thank you, Petar. All great questions are coming in. So far I've got 4 that have come in. What I would encourage you to do is submit any that you have. If we've only got about 5 minutes left, what I'm going to try to do is step through these as quickly as we can so that we can cover as many as we can in the webinar. If there's points that we cannot cover, what I will do is plan on trying to address them in the blog that I'm going to be posting. That's going to be the HP blog under Future of Testing. I've also asked that on the Vivid website with this summary as well as the email that goes out that we would include a link to that once it's posted to make it easy for you guys to see all of these as well. So I think the first one, Petar, is probably going to be kind of addressed towards you, and it came in as you were talking about your future slide. It has to do with, you mentioned Vertica. You kind of implied that it was around some operations analytics. Yep. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about maybe how that plays into your future of this influx of knowledge piece.
Well, I'd say for me, the Vertica piece, for what I can let on of different things that I'm working on or whatnot. with the fact that Vertica can be used as a very nicely integrated piece to provide a platform for your data and then use it as your selection base, so you can quickly get access to lots of disparate data very, very quickly. And not sure what other plans are for anything else, but one of my things I'd love to see done would be have Vertica be used as the basis for a lot of the current tooling platforms in general, just so all that data is there and we can select at it at will and develop systems on top of that, which I believe is kind of how some of the stuff's already being done. But yeah, a lot of it's still in development and being released out as far as I know.
So I guess probably the other thing that you and I probably quickly spent through is what is Vertica? And in short, it's a big data tool that enables you to quickly and easily get results out of unstructured data sets. So as you're hearing what Petar is talking about and how they've started to use some of this within their test data and also HP Diagnostics data, and then also for the vision for what that is looking like in the future. I guess, Scott, I've got another one here that I'm going to try to get to you. The question is around, what does the future performance COE look like, say, in like a 2 to 5 year time span?
Just to allude back to my slide, that I think it becomes less of necessarily an internal group and more of a virtualized group, whether that's internal, external, or a combination of the two. So just like we've moved things into the cloud, our service on demand becomes that way as well. And I think that's going to be the big challenge to be able to do in the next few years is can service-led organizations provide that to companies and still give them, the skill sets that are required, the technical know-how, and be able to integrate with the culture of that individual company as well, knowing how they do business.
Excellent. Thank you, Scott. And there's one last one here that I think I'll pull off, which is how do you guys see people doing large burst performance tests? And they went into, say, like 1,000 to 1.5 million virtual users. So these are significant performance tests. And again, I guess as it would go through this testing methodology that, Scott's talked about, Petar's talked about, I've talked a little bit about, this is the idea of, okay, we've done our 1x test, we've run our 2.5x test, but now we have to run our 5 or 10 or 20x. And again, maybe it's because you've got some special promotion, you've got the holiday season coming up, something like that. There's a new capability that I talked about doing a recent webinar with John Jeremiah on as well. There's a product from HP that's been released called StormRunner Load. So StormRunner is all one word, space, load. The way to get to it, and there's a free trial that's available on Pronq, PRONQ.com. So again, I'll have that information in the blog. There has been another 2 questions that recently came in. I'm not going to be able to get to those right now. We're at the top of the hour. I will address them. However, Stephanie, I'd like to turn it back over to you just to wrap this up quickly with the last 2 slides that we've got.
Great. Thank you, Todd. Tara, do you want to? Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so if you haven't registered already, there's still time to register for HP Discover 2014 in Barcelona, Spain. And the registration link is shown below, and that's December 2nd through the 4th at the Fiera Barcelona, Gran Via. Wonderful facility and a great city to see as well. It's a wonderful conference. Don't miss it. Next slide. Okay, great. So finally, thank you all for attending today's webinar. Please be sure to complete the short survey that will pop up on your screen following the webinar, and be sure to opt in for more information from HP. And if you do this, you'll be automatically entered for a chance to win a $100 Amazon gift card in a drawing. And just another reminder that the webinar recording and slide deck from today's webinar will be posted to the Vivint website. In the next few days, you will receive an email with the links to those. So a very big thank you to Todd, Scott, and Petar for today's excellent presentation. And thank you to the audience for joining our webinar today. I hope you all have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening wherever you are participating from in the world today. And best wishes to everyone. Take care and thank you all.